The Great Steel Strike of 1919 was the tipping point for unionism in America. The events that precipitated this strike were a cancerous mix of corporate greed and management's short-sightedness on behalf of wealthy owners. During the strike, local governments were consumed by these giant corporations. They even facilitated excessive punishments against employees who violated the anti-unionism laws. And we're not talking about corporate police here. We're talking about local municipal police enforcing the laws and wills of wealthy steel mill owners. World War I put a lot of stress on American manufacturing. The demand for soldiers meant that labor was at a premium, and the demand for processed materials like steel was at an all-time record high. In response to this demand, the steel mills of Pennsylvania and other states demanded 12-hour workdays 7 days a week at a wage of 42 to 75 cents per hour. In some instances, wages were raised during the war as a concession to the employees. This increase has been confirmed as being nothing more than a cent or two per hour. This meager increase, although well received, was not enough to suppress the stress and anger amongst the workers of these mills. It was later recounted in a major report that the annual earnings of 72% of all workers were below the level set up by government experts as the minimum comfort level for families of 5. Of that same population, 75% of the total amount of workers couldn't meet the American standard of living. Some argued that the U.S. Steel couldn't pay any more of a higher wage. Yet that was answered in their financial reporting after the strike, because from 1914 to 1919, U.S. Steel's profits rose from $135 million to $493 million, which was larger than its budget for wages and salary. The final report from the strike was able to ascertain that the earnings per ton of steel during the time frame rose from $14 to $19 per ton. With unrest rising, managers of the steel mills, specifically U.S. Steel under control of Andrew Carnegie and Henry Frick, were quick to squash union organizers. Early attempts to prevent uprisings were smartly planned. It was widely reported that because of the large number of immigrants flocking to the factories for work, the mills made it a point to mix ethnicities and languages as much as they could. This way, an employee couldn't communicate with their counterparts due to the inherent cultural and language differences. As the steel mills began to grow, they developed a web of spies and company-paid police who were directed to keep a lookout for any union sympathizers. Steel companies went out of their way to charge potential union sympathizers with menial offenses such as cursing or smiling at the local police. And these convicts were kept within the confines of the factories, which acted as the jail. If these tactics weren't enough to dissuade a potential striker, the thought of being blacklisted from the industry often stopped employees from imbibing in their strike fantasies. For steel was an easily accessible occupation for an immigrant, and much of the only work they could find at the time. As members of the American Federation of Labor began to support the issues of the workers, they demanded a session with management and the owners from the steel mills. The owners rejected the idea and wanted no part of negotiations. The AFL then protested to President Woodrow Wilson. However, at the time, the president was too concerned with his League of Nations, and he passed at the chance of acting as an intermediary. It was with this snub and the refusal to a meeting with U.S. Steel's chairman, Judge E.H. Gary, that the AFL demanded that workers strike. On September 22, 1919, 365,600 workers from Chicago to Pittsburgh went on strike. Picketers were arrested, beat up, even murdered, as was the case of union organizer Fanny Sellens, which made 20 deaths in total. First-hand accounts made it sound as if chaos had descended on the black, dusty steel towns. Yet the mills were not panicking. A mill worker is said to have exclaimed, "If the steel workers all went out, the company would just sit back and let the grass grow green over the furnaces, rather than give the men 8 hours. Let them strike for months. When they're hungry, they'll be back." It was this egotistical mindset that pushed the steel workers over the edge into a strike. Except 4 months later, the same arrogant disregard for workers, an emphasis on violent oppression, would break the wherewithal. By December 10, 1919, 109,300 workers were still on strike. less than 1/3 of what started. The strike would fizzle out January 8th. The winter of 1920 brought with it the need to get back to work next to the smoldering hot steel of the mills. Over the course of the next 13 years, unionism in the steel industry would be nearly non-existent. It wasn't until 1936, where under the guidance of President Franklin Delano Roosevelt, a steel union was able to flourish and take hold.